Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyathela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, why has the MK party withdrawn its case for now to have the 2024 general elections set aside when they were so confident that they have the evidence to prove that the results were rigged? The party says it wants to deal with procedural and technical issues first and will bring the case back in court, emphasizing that the withdrawal is in no way an indication that they do not have a compelling case. But do they? We'll speak to the MK party this evening. Also on the show, on your marks, get set and go. That's the mantra in government now, following the swearing in of ministers. Some of them have already hit the ground running. One of them, who is handling one of the most complex departments, is Basic Education Minister Sihle Zikalala. She will speak to us about her plans to turn around our education system. And then later, when President Cyril Ramaphosa announced his cabinet, some South Africans were shocked to see the demotion of Lesego Makhubela and Sihle Zikalala from the position as ministers to deputies in their previous portfolios, deputies to ministers from the DA. So how will they work with their principals now, who have taken over from them? Will they give them space to lead? How is that going to work? Sihle Zikalala joins us tonight. But first, my comment. So, President Cyril Ramaphosa's executive members for the 7th administration are now officially on the job following their swearing in yesterday. We now have a cabinet and some ministers have already hit the ground running. Next is the cabinet lekgotla. The minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, said this cabinet will then adopt its priorities and program of action at the scheduled lekgotla that is expected next week. But there are a number of things that you and I should worry about, or maybe be cautious of. This GNU represents about 70% of the votes in this year's elections. So this bloc represents the majority of voters. And it's a strong force. If it remains united, it can pass bills, can pass budgets and legislation without much hassle. So this government can really have a smooth, albeit with some disagreements here and there, it can be a smooth administration. But we need to be concerned about who holds this GNU accountable. Seeing that some parties in opposition are now part of the government, which slightly changes things. Yes, there are still significant parties like the MK party and the EFF and the ATM and others who can ensure and have committed to holding the GNU executives accountable. But that's a small pool of the opposition. Is that enough? The government of national unity could bulldoze parties and pass legislation using their majority. But they better be careful of that. Otherwise, the courts, like they have done in the past, can find that parliament fails to hold the executive accountable. So just like the ANC was found wanting before for abusing its majority, it could be the case with this GNU as well, if they abuse their collective majority in parliament. So I hope members of parliament representing parties that are part of the GNU remember that they are constitutionally obliged to hold the GNU executive accountable and that they can't behave in a manner that is inconsistent with the constitution because they have the numbers to do so. So that's one thing I'm slightly worried about, but I'm sure the MK party and the EFF will rise to the occasion. Now, what we also need to look out for is the behavior of new ministers from parties that were previously in opposition. They've always been quick to criticize the government and its slow pace of implementation. They've criticized ANC ministers when there's corruption in their portfolios, even though those ministers were not directly involved. So they're going to be judged against the high standard that they have set for government when they were opposition parties in the previous administration. Government is a beast. It's easy to criticize and make noise from outside until you are in the belly of the beast and you realize how slow things are. You realize how frustrating the red tape is. So good luck to them in living up to the standards that they have set. Remember the DA criticized ministerial benefits like blue lights? Even when the ANC kept on saying, but security is the one that necessitates it. They were never convinced of the security element that the government said necessitates the blue light. So are they already using blue lights now, since they were sworn in yesterday? They also criticized the ministerial handbook, which gives ministers several benefits, like we pay for their water and electricity. But the DA was against that, remember?
We have 387 million rand per year that's being spent on staff, very big staff officers, and in some cases, ministers who are even exceeding the number of staff that they are allowed to employ. Then we have, of course, VIP security, which is about 600 million rand per year for the cabinet, for the ministers and deputy ministers. We have free water and electricity that's adding about another 8 million. We also have the generators that were purchased, 2.6 million rand. And so if you start adding all of this up, it starts becoming a very high bill every year.
They were passionate about that. So will they pay for their water and electricity? Watch out. They were also against cadre deployment.
We maintain that the practice of cadre deployment is a violation of the constitutional provisions, which says that nobody should be discriminated or advanced on the basis of their party affiliation. And we believe that the judgment has missed out on this significantly. We believe too that the recently released cadre deployment minutes, which are now in our possession, and which we are busy collating, compiling, and putting into a searchable database, flies in the face of the court's so-called suggestion of a bright line between the state and party.
And yet they wanted to have DG contracts negotiated and for DA ministers to be involved in the DG's appointments. Now watch who the ministers from the DA will be appointing in their offices, and even in key positions in government and government entities under their departments. And whether or not that's not going to somehow speak to the same cadre deployment they've been against over the years. They were also against a bloated cabinet, right?
We've now had an even larger cabinet with even more ministers laid on top of it, with another broken promise to reduce the size of cabinet. We had the same promise made in 2019 that there was going to be a review of the cabinet size. And here we are with an even larger cabinet. Bear in mind that each cabinet post costs the citizens of South Africa 37 million rand per year. We now had over 70 million rand added to our bill.
And now they are firmly in the very same bloated cabinet, which is going to cost you and I as taxpayers even more. The point here is, let's see if these ministers will behave the same way that they expected ANC ministers to behave over the last few years. I asked Helen Zille on the show on Tuesday if the DA ministers will refuse some of the ministerial benefits that the DA has criticized the government over the years, and this is what she said. You have been critical as the DA of ministerial benefits when you were the main opposition party. Can you assure our viewers this evening that you will be upholding the same standard that you have been imposing on the ANC in government on issues like blue lights, your ministers paying for their own water and electricity, not taking both houses in Cape Town and Pretoria, for instance?
Well, our view has been very well known for a very long time. And that is the DA's approach to things. And I have no reason to believe that our ministers who are currently in government will reject the DA's position on these things. They're there, and Dean Macpherson is our Minister in Public Works, and he has got a very particular responsibility in this regard. So I think you need to ask him. I think you need to ask him what his view is on this. The DA's view is consistent and stable on the question of a trimmed down ministerial handbook in which benefits are significantly reduced.
And let's hope we're going to see exactly that consistency from the DA ministers. The question we're asking you tonight, though, is, are you at all concerned about the role of the opposition in holding the executive accountable? Or do you have confidence in parties like the EFF and the MK party in leading the opposition in holding this GNU executive accountable? Please send us a WhatsApp voice note now to respond to that question on 078-459-1897. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you are sending the voice note from. And please keep it at 30 seconds. Alternatively, you can send us an X at Face the Nation SABC. All right, let's look at the story now. The Umkhonto weSizwe political party has withdrawn its bid in the Electoral Court to nullify the 2024 May polls. This was revealed in a notice of withdrawal before the specialist court. Earlier this month, the newly formed MK party turned to the Electoral Court seeking an order declaring that the 2024 national and provincial elections were not free and fair and therefore invalid. The party also sought, among other things, an order from the specialist court directing the president to call for new elections to be held. The MK Party spokesperson Nhlamulo Ndhlela is facing the nation tonight. Nhlamulo, thank you so much for making time for us. Good evening to you. Why have you decided to withdraw your application for now to have the 2024 general elections set aside? As the MK Party, you were quite confident in the strong evidence that you have.
No, I mean, withdrawal does not necessarily mean or give an indication that, we have now thrown the towel. We've not thrown the towel, yeah. There's nothing wrong with what we've done. Legal teams change strategy all the time. You know, when you find that an answering affidavit that has been submitted by the opposing or the respondent, in this case, opens up new channels, which we were looking for and confirms thereof, that your initial submission, is on the right path. Then you change tact and you change strategy. Mm-hmm. It could be that you feel that maybe at that point you need to go to a different court. It could be that based on the evidence that you have, this answering affidavit gives more credence to that. So we're not in any way, going to pull the plug on this. We're going to continue actually more resolute now, because that answering affidavit has confirmed quite a lot of information and based on the evidence that we have. So we're full steam.
My understanding is that your lawyers have written to the IEC's legal team saying they're still collating evidence of vote rigging. As you say, there's more that's come that you want to include in the court case. So when you made the claims of vote rigging, weren't you satisfied with the evidence that you had received thus far? Because surely you were not reckless to make the claims without strong evidence.
No, we have strong evidence. There's no doubt about that. But when you see that based on the responding or the answering affidavit and the information that you have, the evidence that you have, the discrepancies that have unfolded and then continue to unfold, by the way, because we have a team that continues to investigate this. We have been investigating it ever since the declaration of those results until today, until the day in which we have to actually present that evidence. But here's the reality. We know the evidence that we've submitted. We are in a position where now we believe we need to change the strategy because we don't want our case to be dismissed on the basis of technicalities.
Okay.
And we could see that if people are coming with an answering affidavit where they're trying to use technicalities, in actual fact not realizing they're opening up a can of worms, then we leverage that. Nothing wrong with that.
But then even in this current court application that you are withdrawing, you didn't include the evidence. So why can't you take whatever strong evidence you have to court? Because vote rigging, which I'm sure you understand, is quite a serious matter. So any evidence, big or small, that proves the fraud that you claim will actually work in your favor.
No, but it's not just about evidence and just evidence. You must remember, we're looking at procedures here and legal framework. When you're working with a legal team, they don't just look at just based on the evidence. They look at, what's the substance of that evidence and how you present that evidence. It becomes important. And there's nothing wrong with changing strategy in terms of how you present that evidence and at which court, for instance, you can present certain evidence. There's elements of criminality there, for instance. Is the IEC a best platform for the presentation of criminality? That's another question you need to take into consideration. Does that not lead into certain other elements? That's something else. But look, I'm not going to divulge what the strategy is here. All I'm saying is that there's nothing wrong with changing strategy, and upon realizing that the respondent has now given a whole lot more and given more credence and strength to your case, that you can't change that your approach.
But if really they're strengthening your case, then why are you withdrawing? I mean, if in that answering affidavit you are seeing things that actually reveal and strengthen your case, you just need to respond and then continue with the court case.
No, Clement, you continue to miss the point. I am saying, when you get feedback off the back of an answering affidavit that gives you a different, at least a different approach that you can take, what's wrong with taking that approach? Because there's elements of, for instance, criminality that I'm raising here. Are you saying that the Electoral Court can deal with the issues of criminality and deal with, without giving out our strategy, other elements of the evidence that we have? No. So there's nothing wrong with us changing our strategy.
What are these technical and procedural issues you want to deal with?
No, I cannot disclose that to you.
Okay, let me tell you what I think is probably going on here, because I went through the papers as well.
Believe that.
In their papers,
you got cut off. Sorry, I didn't hear what you were saying.
So I wanted to say, let me put this to you from what the IEC argued in their papers. They argued that you, as the MK party, failed to file a compliant objection before the results were announced. So what the law expects is that you actually have to serve an affidavit or serve a sworn statement, not only to the IEC, but to the other parties as well. That's what actually the law says, before you can object to the election results and go to a court, whether it's the Electoral Court or any other court. And that's not really what you've done.
Are you saying that's not really what we've done?
Yes, the IEC says you've not done that. The IEC says what you've done is you've just merely written to them to complain about votes being rigged. But you've actually not done an affidavit or a sworn statement that you sent to them or to the other parties as well.
Okay, Clement, I think you need to be careful with your choice of words here. You know, you can't say not really and then say the IEC. You know, so it's either your position or the IEC's position. What I'm saying to you here is that we did have sworn affidavits. There's no ways we would not have followed the process and the procedures. We went to the police station, we presented the evidence, we got an affidavit with the police station, we've got case numbers open, and we've submitted those as per Section 55 of the IEC. They even went to the extension, if you recall, of even indulging us and condoning for submissions to be made till the following day. We shared those, and as you would recall, we had a press conference with all other parties where we addressed this issue and we rejected the declaration of those results alongside other parties. When we submit our papers, we submitted those papers alongside other parties. We shared the same documentation and the case numbers alongside other parties. So this misconception that's been created that all of a sudden, we didn't follow procedure, that's a total lie. The reality here is there is evidence. Did they even look at the evidence? They declared, by the way, at the point at which we even submitted those objections, they declared that they were going to announce and declare the results right in the midst of objections that ought to be looked at. They didn't even look at those. They didn't even contact us. Instead, like we said in our press briefing, the CEO called us into what would be a hush-hush side meeting for him to now try and discuss what are the issues in terms of the discrepancies that we've picked up in our case. Why didn't they take us into their confidence and the public into their confidence and have a presser, which is what we requested? No, instead they call us to the side.
But they said you have not.
It was clear that we're intentional.
Yeah, where is the evidence? Because that's really what this case is about, Nhlamulo. When you went to the Constitutional Court to try and stop the first sitting of Parliament, you didn't submit the evidence. At the time, your justification, and Nathi Nhleko, who is your national organizer, was on this show, and he said, the evidence is strong and is already there. We're going to take it to the Electoral Court. And then you get to the Electoral Court, you don't reveal that evidence. Like the case is about evidence of vote rigging, but you're not leading with that.
No, I think where you've missed it is that you recall at one point the IEC said in a statement that they don't believe the evidence that we've submitted was strong enough. So how could they come to that conclusion?
No, I mean to court. To court.
Yeah,
you went to the Constitutional Court.
The Electoral Court, even the Electoral Court, because that same evidence, the Electoral Court presented to the IEC, is that not so? So the IEC was making that feedback, or they're giving that position of the pick of what they received from the Electoral Court based on the evidence that we submitted.
What evidence was that?
Wait. Wait, hold on. Stop interjecting. Let me finish off. So you cannot now create a perception that we didn't submit any evidence. You're asking me, where's the evidence? I'm saying to you, don't create an impression that there was no evidence.
Okay.
There was evidence that was submitted.
Sure.
Number one. Number two, the Constitutional Court issue that you're referring to was not about evidence. The Constitutional Court was to say that we do not believe that there should be a continuation of the swearing in. We're dealing with the issue of the swearing in of the National Assembly, dealing with the issue of whether the National Assembly will be able to correct to even sit to appoint a president. That was what we're saying that cannot happen, especially in light of the fact that one, it cannot correct, and two, there's an issue of the declaration of results that we believe ought to be dealt with also. So it had nothing to do with us having to submit evidence there. It was a totally different issue. But instead, the Constitutional Court gave an order and even referred to and pronounced certain elements of our submissions that had nothing to do with what we were requesting. Okay. They actually presided over a court case which doesn't even exist.
Let me go back
that was
to
not even our submission.
All right, let me go back to the question I'm asking then. What is the evidence you have that suggests to you that the votes were rigged?
Look, the evidence we have is in the form of the slips, okay, which we've collected from various VDs. And we've got a team that is working on collecting all of that. And we've collated all of that. And we've demonstrated certain discrepancies in terms of the votes that were voted against, in terms of what was voted and what was actually captured in the IEC system. So that's one. The other one is that we've mentioned that we've got voice notes of individuals who were calling each other during that 2-hour period. And we've got an audit report, an IT audit report, and a forensic report to that extent. So
what did the voice notes say?
No, I'm not going to touch on that. That will be presented in court. That's not our place for you and I to talk right now.
But they're not in this thing. Is this evidence in court? I mean, the DA joined the application, the IEC. The reason the DA and the IEC said, we don't think this will be a successful court case is because they said these people are bringing a case, but they're not bringing evidence to it.
You know, what we find strange is that, don't forget, the same DA benefited from this rigging fact. So, and you'll see that when we actually present our case. So naturally, they'd want to protect the IEC because from where we're sitting and starting to point that they were probably colluding with the IEC. Fact. So until then, I'm not going to be touching on the DA and them all of a sudden wanting me friends of the court. No, okay. I'm not interested in the DA. We know what their agenda is. What we're focusing on is that we've got a case that's solid. We're going to submit it, and that withdrawal was a strategic.
Okay, when can we expect you to take it back?
It will be expeditiously and soon.
Okay. Nhlamulo Ndhlela, the MK Party spokesperson, thank you so much for making time for us this evening on Face the Nation. That court case will be expeditious, he says, and hopefully we'll see the evidence that the MK Party has that proves that there was vote rigging. That's in the best interest of you and I for us to actually have that evidence revealed, because if really there was vote rigging, the IEC has got to respond and there has to be consequences. But we can't have a conversation about that until we see evidence that is also submitted and tested in court. After the break, Siviwe Kwahube is the Minister of Basic Education. It's one of the most complex departments. What's her plan in turning around our education system? That's the conversation coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. Siviwe Kwahube is the recently appointed Basic Education Minister, and she's promised to raise literacy rates and do away with school pit latrines. Kwahube, one of the 6 DA members appointed to the National Unity Cabinet, takes over from Enji Motshekga, who served in that capacity for over a decade. And Minister Kwahube joins us now on Face the Nation. Minister Kwahube, thank you so much for making time for us this evening. And congratulations, by the way, on your appointment as minister. You have one of the most significant but also complex ministries. You know about the weaknesses in our education system. So let's start with the issue of curriculum, because it doesn't adequately address what the current labor market needs and what the future work requires as well. From your preliminary assessment, does it work, and what is your plan around our curriculum?
Good evening, Clement, and good evening to your viewers. Thank you very much for the well wishes. Yes, and I mean, one of the, in fact, my key priorities is how do we review the curriculum going forward? Because, of course, what we want to do is we want to design a schooling system and a public education system that primes young people for the economy of our future. With the incorporation of the ECD into the Department of Education, it's actually a huge opportunity for us, because what we can then do is we can make sure that from the time that a child has started in an early child development center all the way until matric, that we are equipping them, and we're equipping them for an economy of the future. So it's incredibly significant, an honor and a responsibility that I do not take lightly. But I also know that there are problems and challenges that dog the system, and I'm also not, going to be blasé about them. We've got to be honest about what are some of the key challenges that are facing the system. One of them that really keeps me awake at night is two of them. The one is our numeracy and literacy rates, which are way behind where we should be in terms of our global peers and even our peers on the continent. And number two, the issue around pit latrines and the fact that there are still pit toilets in schools, where children 30 years into our democracy are still dying from drowning in pit toilets. So there are obviously the departmental issues, which I have to get in there and get stuck into, but there are also issues that for me are urgent, and the things around increasing literacy and numeracy, dealing with safety in schools, both for learners and educators, are some of the things that are really key to me, and one of the things that I'm going to prioritize. Yeah,
and speaking of literacy, I mean, you know about the progress in international reading and the literacy study, because that's the one that revealed that 81% of grade 4 children in South Africa could not read for meaning. That was in 2021. That's 8 out of 10. And perhaps one of the reasons why participating countries perform better than our children here is because most of them are taught in their mother tongues. Should that be the approach, to push mother tongue education as far as you can with learners, as opposed to drop it around grade 3 or 4? Because often that's where the test happens, that competency test, when they make that switch. And of course, they won't do well. But there are people that have been calling and advocating for mother tongue education to also be pushed further. Is that something you'd consider?
Look, I mean, and here's the thing, Clement, the important thing, I think, when we're looking at particular curriculum review is we've got to look at the entire system and it's in its entirety, and see where the weaknesses and its strengths are. And so that's why within the next couple of months, I do intend on putting together this consultative body that will be made up of experts, that will be made up of industry experts, stakeholders, civil society, so that we can say, where is the review around the curriculum? Where did that process go and where did it end? And let's come up with recommendations that are not just a report that will gather dust in a department somewhere, but recommendations that we can implement. If then the recommendations from experts is saying, in order for us to improve literacy and numeracy rates, this is what we must do, then we must be humble enough in government as politicians and as government leaders to say we don't have the answers. And so I am really keen, and it's something that I literally want to do within the first month of coming into office. The legislation empowers me to put together that that consultative body, and I would like it to make recommendations that we can implement. I and the 9 MECs need to look at those recommendations, and we need to get moving. Clement, this is not a ribbon cutting department, and a lot of the work that I'm going to have to be doing is going to be difficult. It's going to require difficult conversations. It's going to be tough because change is tough, but it's going to be absolutely critical because the dividends will be seen in years to come.
Absolutely. And of course, there is a curriculum that has evolved over the years in government, but the problem sometimes is the implementation. The documents are there that speaks to how the education can be improved, but the implementation not so good. Another hurdle that you will have is, of course, managing the different stakeholders within the education sector. You've got unions already that see the DA as antagonistic, not as collaborative. When are you going to meet with them and make peace with the union so they see where you come from and be in a position to work with you in improving the education and also just the working relationship of their members, the teachers?
Yeah, look, stakeholders are critical in this portfolio. As I said, even with the consultative body that I want to put together, I'm not going to be alienating any stakeholders. Ultimately, my view is that we've got to place the learner at the center of all that we do. And the unions who represent teachers who are the backbone of the system are critical to that. Because I believe that I and the unions can find each other on that. If the unions are of the belief that we've got to put the learner and the vocation that the teachers chose of teaching learners, I think we already have common ground. And so I'm going to be meeting with not only the department and with my deputy, but also the MECs, but also I'm prioritizing stakeholders and also entities of the department, because I want to get as quickly an orientation as possible so that by the time I start implementing some of the interventions I would like, then I would have gotten the buy-in, because that's important. This can't be a Severe Gwahube project. This has to be a South African project where we say we want our education system to produce the best amongst our peers, and we can do that, but we've got to work together.
The big question here, Severe Minister, is what policy are you here to implement? The DA says you are not here to implement ANC policy. The ANC says, well, existing policy stands until it's repealed or amended. I was listening to the minister in the presidency today who said individual ministers are duty-bound to take to the cabinet issues of policy, significant decisions, such as decisions with financial consequences exceeding a department's approved budget, and any matter that cabinet has decided should be referred to it. And failure to do that could undermine the validity of such a decision. How do you understand what will be your guiding document? Because there's disagreement between your party and the ANC on what policy all these ministers must be implementing over the next 5 years, until, of course, there's an agreed policy agenda after that national dialogue that we're expecting later on.
Look, I'm very clear, Clement, when it comes to this particular department because of its importance. The GNU and our policy conference and our national dialogue is a separate process where we will have robust discussions with our political people we are in the GNU with, where we will, grapple with some of these things and how best to tackle the issues facing South Africa. But this department is not going to be the battleground for policy and politics. This department has to focus on its core business. I'm not the minister of the DA. I'm the minister of basic education, and I want to assure not only the people in the department, not only the teachers out there, I want to assure the parents that mine is not to come here and play politics with the future of the children. Those policy discussions will be happening separately as political parties, and we will resolve those as part of the GNU. But here, there's a core business, and the core business is to put the learner first, and I'm not wanting to have lightning rods that are political battles playing themselves out in the department.
All right. Minister Siviwe Gwahube, the Minister of Basic Education, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight on Face the Nation, and all the best with your department over the next 5 years. The question we've been asking you tonight is, how concerned are you about the role of the opposition in holding the executive accountable? Or do you have confidence in the EFF and the MK party in leading the opposition in holding this GNU executive accountable? I mean, you've got so many parties that are now part of this GNU executive. The main opposition party, or at least what used to be the Democratic Alliance, is also in government. So let's look at your views. Malikaya on X says, hi Clement, it does look like it's going to be lit in Parliament with the MK and EFF on one side and the DA struggling to remain true to its rule of law rhetoric while protecting the ANC as they are now fellow travelers. South Africans might benefit from this if all of them do their jobs. Maso says, I just hope they won't oppose just for the sake of it. Let MK Party, Action SA and the EFF bring their A game in terms of holding the executives accountable. Siabulela says, good evening, Clement, and good evening to your viewers at home. The EFF did more without being an official opposition. I believe that the executive will be properly held accountable. Hopefully, they'll respond positively and accordingly account when necessary. Sake says, evening, I think because we have 9 political parties governing, they will hold each other accountable in that GNU. And of course, the opposition parties will do the same. Thank you so much for your tweets or X's that have come through. You've also sent your WhatsApp voice notes on what your thoughts are about the role of the opposition. Let's take a listen. All right, so I'm told we'll play those WhatsApp voice notes after the break. Stay with us. When we come back, we still have Sihle Zikalala, who was the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure. He's now the Deputy. We'll also be joined by Lesego Makhubela, who is representing the ANC here in Gauteng, following the announcement of Premier Panyaza Lesufi's cabinet. And then we'll wrap up with your WhatsApp voice notes. Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. After 3 weeks of intense discussions to form a government of provincial unity in Gauteng, the executive cabinet for the province was announced yesterday with the exclusion of the Democratic Alliance. And there are further negotiations with the DA, but could they bring about any result? The Gauteng ANC spokesperson and chief of Lesego Makhubela joins us in studio this evening. Lesego, thanks for making time for us. So Panyaza Lesufi earlier today said the door is still open to the Democratic Alliance. If they really insist on their 4 positions, then we'll go back to the negotiating table. Is that still the position of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, in Gauteng?
Of course, the door is still open for all other parties that have not signed into the GNU. Our interpretation of the electoral results, from what our people were saying to us, was to say go and form an inclusive government. And that inclusive government must be able to represent the broader spectrum of all the political parties represented in the legislature as well as in parliament. And that's why we reached out to all parties. We spoke to all parties, regardless of the differences in terms of ideology. What these parties stand for, others they stand for nothing. But we spoke with all those parties nonetheless, because our ideological tools of analysis made it clear to us that what the voter is telling us is that we have to build a government of national unity, and in respect of how they a government of provincial unity. So the door is open. It's open for the DA, it's open for the EFF, it's open for MK, it's open for the ACDP, which is yet to sign, and it's open for all the parties, because we are very genuine about what we are trying to do.
So the Democratic Alliance always quote the document of intent that says, as you constitute the government, you not only have to look at national interests, but you have got to look at the support that a political party has also received and the seats they have in this case, the provincial legislature. There's a 6% difference between your support and that of the Democratic Alliance. I mean, that would suggest that the people of Gauteng voted for the DA and would have loved, clearly some of them, to see them somehow being involved in government if there's a constitution of a government of national unity. Why not give them that 4th position they're asking for?
We've been refusing to flagellate ourselves and say something in public and another thing in the boardrooms. And that's what has been happening with our discussions with the DA. Because there's not been a lot of truths that have been said, especially with the press conference which they did with Madam Helen Zille. We were shocked by it. The DA gave us a document. It was not even a document of a statement of intent, which was drafted by the ANC National Executive Committee. They gave us a document which the chair of the ANC read yesterday together with the Secretary General. That statement says, ANC, take 7 cabinet posts, give us 3, take a speaker, give us a deputy speaker, take a deputy chairperson of committees, give us a chairperson of committees, and then they made a statement about how the committees must be constituted. It was their own document that they signed. That is before the election of the speaker and the election of the premier. We found that reasonable, and we said it's not a problem. Let's sign into that document. We signed the document. and that concluded our negotiations with the DA. It changed a week later, and that's not what they are saying. And maybe perhaps they told the madam later that this is the deal we gave the ANC. It was not our deal on the table. Our deal on the table was that we're negotiating with you guided by the national framework adopted by the National Executive Committee, which has made it clear that we have to ensure that whatever government we form, it represents the broader spectrum of all political parties represented in the legislature, but also even in the oversight mechanism, because the emphasis should not only be about government, but it also has to speak about the legislative mechanisms on how we hold government into account and all sorts of. That is the spirit. And after our negotiations with the DA, because we signed their deal, we signed an agreement, we have a written agreement signed by them, given to us. We went and spoke with other parties based on what we have agreed with the DA. And another misconception, Clement, that we have to actually clarify so that people can understand. We are not in a coalition with the DA. The National Executive Committee of the ANC, its interpretation of the election results, rejected Grand Coalition because that would be a shortcut to power. The two big powers, the two big parties, as we were speaking about numbers, right? The two big parties being the African National Congress and the DA, and they form a government and then they throttle everyone out. We rejected that. The National Executive Committee said that's not the way to go. Then there were those in the NEC that said, no, let's form a minority government. And then there were those who said, no, let's have what we did with Mandela, because the moral compass of our decision making has been tilted toward the spindles of what Mandela taught us in 1994. And that's why this national government of national unity, as well as a government of provincial unity in Gauteng. And that's when we took a decision that the only way to navigate this impasse that we find ourselves and based on the electoral outcomes is to form a government of provincial unity and a national
but let's also be real, Lesego, it's the ANC and the DA that are running the show in this, which is why the president couldn't even announce his cabinet until he finishes discussions that were critical with the Democratic Alliance, which is why even the IFP had to hold a press conference and say, yo, ANC, DA, sort out your business. We're waiting here and we can't continue in this paralysis.
I think it's an obsession of certain sections of the media and some commentators that it's about the ANC, and it is not. When the president postponed his press conference, the EFF also had a press conference and said, we met the president. By the way, at the door of him announcing, the negotiators of the ANC at National also said, no, now we have met the PIC. The PIC joined very late, and other parties also joined the GNU very late. So there's a deliberate obsession to make this about the DA and the EFF. And the ANC is not.
But sufficient consensus in the document of intent says 60% is what you need for sufficient consensus. Who's got 60% in the GNU? That's the ANC and the DA.
And that's why we kept on saying to Helen, we said, Helen Zille, this is our document, we authored it. And if ever
you co-authored it?
No, we wrote it on, and we did not co-author the document, we wrote it on our own. They agreed to an ANC document.
But there was a back and forth. The DA came back with, no, let's change this wording, this doesn't work. That's a co-authoring of the document.
No, the document was written by the African National Congress. The National Executive Committee sat and gave us a marching orders and said, Government of National Unity, communicated that and said, we are going to invite. The statement of intent is an invitation card to all the parties. And therefore, we said to all parties, including Helen, we said, and Soli here in Gauteng, we said if there's any ambiguity in the document, the only people who can clarify these ambiguities is us. We can come and explain to you, this is what we meant on this particular paragraph. Yeah. This is what this wording means. No, you can't come and want to explain to us a document we authored. Yes.
But then what I'm asking though is, if really the sufficient consensus is 60%, ANC and DA have 60%, there's nothing that can happen in this GNU without these two parties. Do you accept that? What's going to happen with that?
That's why in Gauteng we will pass the budget. All the matters that will come to the order paper of the legislature will pass, because we are speaking with all parties. We are genuine about what we are trying to do. And even when you want to, especially when you relate this to Gauteng, and you want to speak about proportionality, the DA is running Tshwane through a coalition. It does not have a popular vote. It does not have a lion's share of the vote as compared to the ANC in that particular council. Mm-hmm. But look at how it constituted government. And even when you base it on that, we were criticized heavily by a lot of people and saying we're in some sort of arrangement in Johannesburg. Al-Jama has a mayorship position with 2 seats. And we explained why that is the case. Because if you want to build an inclusive government of provincial unity, mm-hmm. it does not matter how many seats you have. What matters is that you are represented there and you represent the best that we have in the legislature, and that you will align yourself with the statement of intent. That's why we have a cabinet member in Gauteng of Rice Mzansi with 1 seat.
Okay. Lesego Makhubela, ANC spokesperson in Gauteng, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming through on Face the Nation tonight. Let's look at this now. The new Public Works and Infrastructure Minister, Dean Macpherson, says there will be no lavish lifestyles for members of the Executive and Parliamentarians. He says they're not going to allow the procuring of accommodation and offices for ministers in the 7th administration. He replaced Sihle Zikalala as minister, is one of the 6 ministers from the DA that form part of the GNU. Now, Sihle Zikalala, who is now the Deputy Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, joins us now on Face the Nation. Deputy Minister, thank you so much for making time for us. So from Minister to Deputy, but still in the same portfolio, you didn't have enough time in the department, only about a year or so. What have you been able to push over that year in the department?
I think you would have noticed that in a period of a year, we managed to consolidate a number of projects and run with those projects. One of that is the consolidation of the infrastructure development, where we have even launched the infrastructure book, which entail projects that are going for project preparations right now.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have seen us unveiling the Welisizwe bridges, which when we got into the department, there was no progress, and we managed to pull through and force that there be progress on Welisizwe bridges. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've noticed that we are scaling up on the extended public works program. A number of activities, a number of programs that we have ran. Fourthly, I'm sure you saw us focusing on professionalization of the industry with supporting students who are studying in the industry. The program of young professionals, just this year we've scaled up to more than 100 bursaries. So these are few things that we've managed to do in a period of less than a year, as you said.
So you're now going to deputize the DA's Dean Macpherson. Have you already met? Is there a handover process? What are some of the key things you've advised him to focus on, if you've already met?
We have already met, and we're meeting tomorrow. The handover process is there, including the handover report. We have agreed on how to process that. But I wouldn't want to speak on what we have discussed with him as if I'm a spokesperson of the department. That has a process and procedures that will be followed by the department when we communicate. Mm-hmm. But we have said that the election results have brought us to be where we are. We must work together. We must assist the leadership, including the president, to ensure that the government is stable, and we must run together on all programs.
How will you be working together, though, Deputy Minister? Normally, deputy ministers are seen as ceremonial. You are not part of cabinet. Do you have executive powers and authority? So what are actually going to be your responsibilities?
No, it is wrong to say they are ceremonial. Deputy ministers often get powers, delegated functions. They are either come straight from the minister or come from the president. The deputy minister who was working with me had delegated functions, and that is how we are going to work on, where we will say these are functions of the minister, these are functions of the deputy minister.
Okay. Are you worried at all about possible clashes around policy? The Public Works Minister tweeted after he was appointed minister that he can't wait to implement DA policies in that department. The presidency indicated today that existing policy is what stands, but there are clearly differences on what the approaches of the ministers should be in as far as policy is concerned. Is that a concern to you as a deputy to a minister from the DA?
Well, this is what South Africans have said we must have. No party won outrightly, and therefore there will be this kind of government. And that's why I'm saying it needs proper management. In this case, I believe myself and the minister are matured enough to engage on policy issues and ensure where there are differences, we develop a clear process of handling those differences.
Yeah, the minister has already hit the ground running. He has announced that government will only use existing state properties for housing and offices, so no new properties will be bought or rented to save money. How significant is this going to be?
The cabinet last year adopted what we called asset optimization strategy. The asset optimization strategy talked to ensuring that we renovate the government buildings to be used by department instead of department going to lease in the private sector. So what is saying partly have been done in government, but it needs to be managed properly. It needs to go through the cabinet. It needs the support of all ministers so that we work together.
So what he has announced, does it still need to be supported, as you say, by all the other ministers, or was it ready?
I would argue that while we have the Giyama Act, which gives public works custodianship of state assets, but when it comes to the department and departmental needs, you still need to engage with those departments, that these are needs that each and every department has, and therefore these needs will be accommodated in this particular way.
But has the minister engaged with those other departments before this announcement was made?
Well, I wouldn't want to speak on that. You are asking a question that may be answered by a relevant person.
Yeah, but you met yesterday. I thought maybe you probably, when you saw the news and the announcement is made.
You know that I'm a deputy minister, ne?
Yeah.
I'm not a spokesperson.
Okay, let's wrap up this.
I'm not the spokesperson of the minister,
yeah.
So allow that question to go to the relevant person.
Yeah, I think that tells me a lot, your response, but I think you make a fair point. Let me not push you on it. Minister, Deputy Minister, sometimes we treat ministers just as politicians when we never really tap into how you guys feel. And I just want to know from you, from your own personal experience, having been moved from that crucial center of power as minister to be a deputy in the same department of someone who comes from another political party, do you see that as a demotion at all? How do you feel?
Firstly, when we joined the revolution, we are in government, and some of us not for our own sake. We are in government because we are placed here by the revolution. When we joined the revolution, we never expected positions. It comes as just an added responsibility when you grow in the organization. And therefore, any responsibility that is given by the revolutionary movement, the ANC, will be asserted, and we will have to work accordingly.
Sihle Zikalala.
So it's not a demotion.
Yeah.
We never joined this journey. When we started this journey, it was never for personal gains of oppositions, but it was to ensure the liberation of South Africans. And in this case, it is about ensuring the transformation of South Africa and the development of South Africa, in particular the previously oppressed South Africans.
Sihle Zikalala, the Deputy Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, thank you so much for making time for us. Let's go straight to your WhatsApp voice notes that have come through this evening on the question we've been asking you about the role of the opposition that will be holding this GNU executive accountable.
My name is Alon Sibongile. I'm in East London, in the Eastern Cape. I have a confidence to both EFF and the MK that they are the proper opposition parties in the current situation of this GNU. So I'm very, very confident that they are going to make what is expected from them and as the opposition parties. Thank you.
Hi, Clement. I think the EFF will be able to man their position as the opposition party. I think they have the mental agility and facade to they can hold those in power accountable. Tsepo Manyani, Jamestown.
My hope is that the MK and EFF will criticize in a constructive way so that we can move forward as a country and no fights in parliament and all the stuff. I'm Skombuzo Wababa in Kliptown.
And that's how we wrap up the Thursday edition of Face the Nation. Thank you so much for engaging with us on X and on the voice note line. We'll be back on Tuesday next week at 8 p.m. Have a good evening. Cheers.